DisruptHealth. I am your host, Julie Palumbo, and today I am so excited to have Allison Morgan of Zensational Kids as our guest today. And our episode is actually brought to you by Zensational Kids, so you can learn so much about this organization and how much it's helping children's lives. So welcome, Allison. It's great having you here.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here with you.
So why don't we start out with you just explaining to the viewers a little bit about Zensational Kids?
Sure. Well, we're an educational company that is helping schools implement breath, movement, and mindfulness into the classroom. And really the purpose is to create a culture of greater focus, attention, ease, self-regulation, really helping students and teachers to cope with not only all the demands of education, but just of being. And we're in a very interesting time right now in this country because it just seems like there's stress and overwhelm everywhere. So bringing some calm and ease into the classroom, but really from working from the inside out. So really what we're doing is we're implementing the practices of yoga and mindfulness to help cultivate the inner resources for students and for teachers.
Wow. So tell us a little bit more about the yoga and mindfulness and how you incorporate that into your practice and overall what that means to you.
Sure. Well, I like to define what yoga and mindfulness actually are, because for some people, if you're not familiar with the practices, you know, there's so much in the media that might sort of taint your view, or maybe things that you've read or heard. And if you haven't engaged in the practice yourself, you may not really know what it is. So yoga as a practice, it's learning how to use your breath, the in-breath and the out-breath, in very specific ways. Then there's movement, so we call that in yoga asana. So it's different postures and patterns of how we would move our body. And there's also an element of relaxation, which sounds so funny, like relax, you know, but we don't as a society know how to relax.
Yes,
so it's very
helpful.
Right, to learn techniques of how to relax your mind and your body. And the other component of yoga is mindfulness. So really, you know, why are these four things so important right now for education or just for being a human being? Is that, you know, through our breath, we're really able to manage our nervous system. So we have these two branches of our nervous system. One branch keeps us all revved up and keeps us in a stress state. And the other branch is really the one that's called the parasympathetic nervous system, helps us to relax and calm down and be more easeful. But really, our breath is a mechanism by which we actually have some control over that. So we can turn on those branches of the nervous system that we really need to aid us in the moment or aid us in terms of our own well-being. Right. And in terms of movement, really, you know, how we move our body and how we hold our body really sends so much information to our brain about our state of being and our well-being. And how we use our body affects all of our hormonal systems that actually regulate a lot of our mood. So using our body and our breath together are very, very powerful resources to cultivate ease within our body. And like I said earlier, just learning how to relax. Relax does not mean go to sleep.
Right.
Relax means just like soften and open. A soften and open body really is a soften and open mind for learning.
And I could imagine that that has such an impact on children, whereas, you know, maybe adults think that it is only for grown-ups and adults and maybe the teachers and the parents, but it is a very important part of the lives and well-being of students.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what we know, you know, sort of common sense and then the research supports is when you're in a stressed or overwhelmed, anxious or angry state, the mind is not receptive to learn at all. In fact, those centers of our brain that help us remember information, or we use as coping skills, or helps us to organize and make decisions. Like these centers of our brain are actually turned off.
Wow.
When we are in states of like overwhelm and anxiety. So learning tools where we can literally calm down the stress centers of the brain and open up the learning centers of our brain are highly advantageous when you're in a learning setting.
Yes, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing I did just want to also define a little bit, if I could, is just mindfulness in general, because along with it being a component of yoga, there are many practices of mindfulness that are sort of standalone.
Okay.
And the way that I define mindfulness is an awareness of your present moment experience.
Okay.
So, in school, your present moment is the learning, right? The learning that's happening. But at the same time that there's external things happening in the moment, there are also internal things happening in the moment. So we have thoughts that are always, that mind that's chatting to us, that's happening in the moment.
Yep.
We have feelings of maybe happy, maybe sad, maybe overwhelmed. And those emotions also have sensations within the body. So we have all these internal things happening in the moment and external things happening, which are really, really separate, but depending on what's happening on the inside is going to affect how we engaged with the external. So mindful practice just helps you cultivate an awareness of really what's happening in the moment, but without putting judgment on it. And with looking at that present moment with a bit of curiosity, like, I'm feeling this sensation. What's that about?
So hang on, go back. Sorry, my light fell, and you could.
Yeah. Crash.
Okay. I know. Sorry, you're doing well. Okay, just start with that last sentence. Okay.
So when we're practicing mindfulness, along with cultivating an awareness of what's happening in the present moment, we do this in a very specific way of being non-judgmental about it.
Yeah.
And we tend to bring our judgments not only on ourselves, but on others that we're interacting with. So creating this sense of non-judgment, of more curiosity, of, what is this, say, sensation that I have, and where is it coming from, and where is it going? Is it moving, or is it staying here? And also layering on some compassion.
That's important. Definitely.
Yeah. It's important, and it's something that is not really, it's not talked about a lot in our culture.
Yep.
And we also don't necessarily learn explicit ways of how to be compassionate for ourselves and for others. It's sort of something that we just expect that it's going to happen.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, and the research really shows, it's so interesting because the research shows that this is innate within us. So they can do studies on infants, around 6 months old. And we know that we have this sense of like looking for the good and wanting to move towards happiness and kindness and love. And in young children, that is really, really apparent. But as we get older, I think it's, we layer on the stress of life. We layer on the judgment. We layer on this like negative bias that we have in our brain. And we start to forget that we need to care for ourselves so that we could care for others.
You're exactly right. It's kind of like, you can't pour out of an empty cup. So you have to fill your cup first.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's at any age.
Exactly. So you touched on it a bit earlier, but why did you decide to start bringing this mindfulness and yoga into the schools?
Yeah, it's really been a incredible journey for me. I've been in education for over 25 years. But I started as an occupational therapist, school-based OT, working with a lot of special needs kids. So a lot of kids with autism and ADHD and general learning challenges. And they were certainly struggling within the, whether it's an inclusive classroom, a classified classroom, or a general ed classroom. And, I had a lot of training in traditional therapeutic models of how we would work with these different, abilities that children had. And it wasn't until literally I walked into my first yoga class, not for any reason of like, oh, this would be good to bring to my students. This is about 15 years ago. Yoga was not really a popular thing at all. I just happened to walk into a class and like, I have no idea what yoga is or what it's going to feel like. I just feel, I think I'm going to try it. But it was in that moment of standing on my mat, breathing very consciously, moving my body slowly with a lot of awareness, that I started to feel different in my body, different in my mind. And the best way to describe that is I felt really, really calm, really clear, really grounded, but so awake and alert.
Yep.
And it was like sort of this dichotomy that really fits so nicely together. And it was such an aha moment to me because it seemed like we should feel like this all the time.
Yes.
And most often we don't. And what really came to me was, I don't really think the students that I work with ever feel this way. And the way that I was able to feel this way was from breathing in a certain way, moving my body very consciously, relaxing my body, and being mindful. So I thought, I wonder if I could teach this to kids. Nobody was doing it at the time. It was sort of trial and error, really. Let me just see what I'm doing in my body and can I translate it in a way that would make sense to them that they can engage in the practices. And quite honestly, they picked it up so quickly.
That I typically do, right? Kids always know what to do.
And I always say, those first few years, those students were my best teachers. Because they so honestly and so quickly would respond to what I was sharing with them. So I knew like sort of what worked and what didn't work. And along with the students really showing me, through their behavior and their attention of what practices were really assisting them, all the teachers started commenting, asking me, what are you doing in those therapy sessions? Because they're coming back and really, really attentive, really calm in their body, sharing and responding and getting eye contact.
That's amazing. So were you working with all students or just the special needs students at this time?
Well, it started out, honestly, with just the special ed students because those were the kids on my caseload. But what started happening very quickly was as students were spending more time in general ed or inclusive classrooms, more of my therapy was done in those classrooms. So teachers started asking me, like, can you show me what you've been doing in therapy? Or could you do something with the whole class so that we can include this child in what we're doing? So really all I was doing was up in front of the classroom with all, 25 kids or so. And I was doing yoga and mindfulness with them.
That's amazing.
It was so amazing because it only takes a few seconds, not seconds, maybe a minute or two, quite honestly, to get this shift within your nervous system from being on this, go, 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 elevated state to really settling. And that transition happens a lot quicker with the students than it does when I'm working with educators, working with the adults, which I don't know, maybe if we'll have time to talk about that this time or or maybe on another time.
Mm-hmm.
But the students picked it up very, very quickly. And I always say, yeah, because they know what feels good. And they want that, they're craving this sense of self-soothing.
Yep.
And grounding and feeling just connected, like in their own body, and feeling safe in their own body, because very often they don't.
That's very
Yeah, so essentially what happened was I knew that this was an incredible practice that I was bringing into the classroom. And at this time, there were really, nobody was doing this. So I didn't have a lot of resources for myself outside of, like, where can I go and learn more about this and really hone this skill. It was really up to me to, research it as best I can and keep reaching out to other people. But it got to the point where I was doing such specific things in classrooms that were highly impactful that I knew I had to go out there and teach this and get it to more educators and more students. So I developed Zensational Kids. I developed all these different training programs and curriculum specifically written for teachers.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, and the reason why I did that, I mean, there are a lot of mindfulness and yoga companies out there now that are doing similar work to me, and many of them they're fabulous, absolutely fabulous. When I was forming Zensational Kids and writing the curriculum, what was very, very clear to me is that these are specific tools and practices that really anybody can do. You just need to know what it is that you do.
Yep.
So it doesn't require, a 200-hour yoga certification. It doesn't require, spending years on a silent retreat and living in a cave or a monastery and learning how to meditate.
Right.
It takes really the courage to be able to practice, 2 to 3 minutes of something very specific that we lay out for you, to practice it in your own body, and then share it with a student.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's really about creating new neural pathways within the brain and connecting the brain and the body, coming back into the body, because we spend so much time thinking about how much intellect am I going to put there into the brain, but remembering the wisdom of the body. And practicing these things just a few minutes a day. Really just a few minutes a day. So to me, it was really, really clear that I had to reach educators. I had to give them the tools and the practices that they needed to share with their students, because in my big vision, my big hope and wish is that every single child, every single student learns how they themselves have control of themselves.
I love that. That's so special. It's such an important trait to instill in children at that age.
It's really like, children of all ages. And right now, our society has become so stringent in terms of education, of what we have to teach our students with this core curriculum, and how many minutes you have to spend on math and English, and how much homework. And things are getting taken away, like music and art and recess, all of these opportunities for students to express themselves, to get to know more about who they are, their ability to interact with other students, peer relationships, social and emotional awareness. All of those things often are getting stripped. And in order to learn how to be a compassionate, caring human being, we need those things. So, trying to find ways where I'm always about bridging the gap. it would be lovely to say, you know, let's reform every single thing that we do about education so that we're really teaching to the whole child and everybody is getting all this free play time and self-expression and all of this. Yeah, my big hope is that someday all that really happens.
That would be amazing. And I feel like, you know, you touched upon it when you said about, you know, intellectually, it's all about, you know, how much time you spend on math and reading and the different subjects, but perhaps it pays to kind of take time so that by practicing these kind of meditation and mindfulness practices, they're actually handling the workload in a better manner and maybe would even perform better because they're not so anxious and they're actually being mindful in the subject that they're in and not thinking about tomorrow's assignment. You know, so I feel like it's not only changing what they're learning, but how they're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is really the big bridging of the gap between where kids are and where we hope that they would be, is helping them learn how they themselves can get themselves into a state of being ready to learn and receive. And the way that I explain it to educators very often is, you know, they're starting to teach their subject matter when students are, you know, ruminating about something that happened earlier that day, or perseverating on something that's going to happen in the future and becoming anxious about it. Like they're not in a learning ready state. So this is why very often a lot of them miss the content.
Yes.
For an educator, you just have to teach it over and over and over again, which is extremely time consuming.
Yep.
Whereas if you take maybe 2 minutes before you start teaching and you just allow everyone to like settle into themselves, to take a few breaths, to really calm their nervous system and center their mind and focus their attention, then they're available. They're available to receive
that's
what you're offering.
Amazing. That is amazing. I love that idea and that concept. Now, I know you started off working with special case students. Now, what type of demographic and types of schools do Zensational Kids come into?
Yeah, so really now we're touching on every type of student that a school has. And the types of schools that we're working with are incredibly diverse because it really is all about, you know, meeting the needs of a school community or the students that you have. So we work with some very high performing schools where their greatest issues is that they have a high population of stressed, anxious students, maybe an element of depression. And their general issue is that there's a lot of drug and alcohol abuse because that's typically the trajectory when they're overstressed, overwhelmed, they can't manage themselves, they can't manage the overwhelm. You know, by the time they're late adolescents and high school students, they're, you know, looking for the drugs and alcohol just to de-escalate themselves. Because
they're almost self-medicating their problems with drugs and alcohol.
Exactly. And then we have the other end of that spectrum. We work with students with schools that are urban, you know, inner city schools, high poverty, an element of homelessness, family situations and lifestyles that are very tenuous. We have students that are raising siblings. We have students that are being raised by grandparents. These are, you know, high trauma types of environments. And, you know, this is sort of like the interesting thing that's been happening in schools, you know, that we're noticing with our youth, and we're getting much more aware and educated about it. The first being just the mental health crisis right now. You know, we've never had so many students that are anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, depressed, and suicidal ideation.
Gosh.
And nationally, you know, the statistic is 1 out of 5 adolescents have or will have a mental health disorder by the time they're an adult.
Gosh.
1 in 5.
That is so high.
It's really, really crazy.
Yeah.
It's really, really
Yeah.
crazy.
It's quite alarming. That's for sure.
Yeah. And really what a lot of schools are noticing is that their school counselors, they can't keep up with the need. You know, the students that either are reaching out for some type of help, so they're seeking out the school counselors often, or the amount of challenges that they're having in the classroom just because of behavior.
Wow.
Because students can't manage themselves, so it ends up being a behavioral outburst. And in a class of 20 to 30 kids in some classrooms that we work with, it's hard for a teacher to manage that and go on teaching. The other statistic that's really quite alarming is regarding trauma, where 1 out of 4 students have experienced a traumatic event.
Wow.
And we know that trauma,
so alarming. Wow.
It's very alarming, and we know that trauma changes the neural structure of the brain.
Yep.
So if we don't address the trauma, we don't address the students that are having behavioral issues or learning challenges because of trauma, we're really setting them up for future failure.
Wow.
Because it does create changes within the brain that can then lead to mental health issues. It can then lead to drug and alcohol abuse. There is a very high rate of incarceration with students that have experienced trauma that does not get resolved.
Yeah.
So these are big issues affecting education right now. These are high numbers. They cannot be ignored. And what I say, like, the gift of these practices that we've been sharing is that they're preventative and they're therapeutic at the same time.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter where in that sort of spectrum the student is. You share the same practices with those students, and they sort of work on both ends of that spectrum.
Exactly.
Trauma encompasses so much more. It's neglect, whether it's emotional or physical neglect. If there's depression in the home, like maternal or paternal depression. If there's any type of drug or alcohol abuse in the home, of an adult in the home, that would be a marker for trauma. If anyone in the family has been incarcerated, that's an element of trauma. There's so many things surrounding a student in their, familial environment and community environment.
Yeah.
That just adds, another check mark of an element of trauma. And in the ACE scores, they actually have a way where you add them up and you can see the level of trauma that a child has had. And what's really amazing, as we're sharing more in our trainings with schools about trauma, because you'd be surprised of how many educators are not aware of this at all, is we're having the educators go and take the ACE score for themselves.
Wow, that's a good idea.
And many of them are discovering that they have been through a lot of trauma. And it really does, on one hand, it could be very upsetting, like to recognize, like, wow, the way that I was raised or what I went through as a child, essentially, I'm an individual that suffered from trauma.
Right.
Also highly enlightening, because it gives you some insight into how your brain is processing some of your external experiences and things about relationships. Because when you have a brain that has been wired through trauma, you're much more reactive because you're always searching for safety. Like, that's your primary thing. Just, how do I get safe? How do I get out of here? How do I end this conversation? Or how do I just protect myself?
Yep.
So, I've had educators just big aha moments.
I can imagine. That is really eye-opening too, is, maybe you think that you're approaching something in a certain way, you don't know why, and then you take this assessment and you're like, oh, so that's why. that's why I have this reaction to certain things, or, they'll have triggers, and, that could all be related.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And it sort of allows you to forgive yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I want to like jump down your throat right now, but I know that that's just my brain trying to protect me. So, okay, I'm going to try and take a breath here and take a step back.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure not only does it bring about awareness in yourself, but in other people too. You could kind of then say, okay, why are they reacting this way? Is it because of something else that has nothing to do with me? Which 100% of the time, it has nothing to do with you. It's them.
Absolutely. And for an educator that is dealing with so many behaviors in the classroom, that really is huge, because it gives you another perspective or another internal dialogue of what we typically would have with a child that's breaking down in a classroom, where we may have gone to like, what is wrong with that kid today? Like, why is he behaving like this again? And instead, the dialogue sort of changes to what has happened to that child today.
Yeah.
That is creating so much confusion and disruption within them that is overloading them.
I'm sure. That's amazing. So overall, with all the schools and everything that Zensational Kids has been doing and working with, what outcomes have you seen through all of this?
Yeah, it's really just so incredible, for working with schools that have identified some significant issues that they're having, and then seeing how just applying the same practices that we do in schools that are having different issues, how it helps so globally. So like we have one district right now that where they hired us because they had too many suspensions, essentially. It's an alternative school, so these are students that cannot make it in their traditional classroom setting, and they need a lot of extra supports and like restrictions and things like that. These are kids that are probably very, very close to going to juvenile detention and things like that. They've gotten in trouble with the law.
Wow.
So we've trained their educators on how to use our curriculum. They do mindfulness every morning, every afternoon. Wow.
That's
from 2 to 5 minutes. This is actually their second year of implementing the program. So they started a year ago, September.
Okay.
So this September, now we're on our second year. And from September to the end of October, they haven't had one single suspension.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Which is really, really, it's so amazing.
Yeah.
And, for me, I always come into every environment with every school of it's not really just about seeing the potential that school has, but knowing that there are no bad kids.
Right.
There are bad situations, but there are no bad kids. And even though some of these are, they're 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old kids that really have been through a lot, when I'm working with them, like I just see how much power they really have within themselves.
Yeah.
It's not directed in the right way,
Yes.
So we see some kids that, they were the ones throwing the desks down and, always getting into fights. They actually have been becoming the mindful leaders in the schools, and they're leading their peers in mindfulness, which is amazing.
That is awesome.
In some other schools, what we're seeing is, they come to us because, like I had said earlier, their school counselors just can't keep up. Like there's a line forming out their room. So they've seen a tremendous reduction in kids that are coming to counseling.
That's awesome.
For the minor things that they just couldn't manage.
Yep.
And then for those that are still coming, they're spending a lot less time out of the classroom, because we also, along with training the educators, we're training all the school counselors. So they're using that as part of their therapy, as part of their session. So as students are coming to them with issues from the classroom or home or whatever, rather than just slowly like having a talk session about, okay, tell me what happened and what should you have done and could you have made a better decision?
Yep.
They're having them come in, sit, breathe, close your eyes, notice how you feel, take a deep breath in, a deep breath out, let your body settle. So they're guiding them in some mindfulness.
Yeah.
Where then the student is able to process what has happened.
Yep.
And able to calm much quicker, and is spending less time out of the classroom, because then they're able to go back.
There you go. And you're making it more efficient and effective for the counselors and the educators. So everyone is doing their job more properly because they have more time, and they're not just, taking kids and passing them out just to get to the next one. They're actually being effective in their work, which is what everybody wants. So that is amazing.
So for, school counselors and educators that have a lot of behavioral issues, that are highly stressed or anxious or been through trauma, for those faculty members, that's highly stressful for them as well. For an educator on the floor, having to deal with a student that's emotionally breaking down and still teach a class with 25 other students and keep that going, it's a lot to manage.
Yes.
It really, really is. It's hard to hold it all together, and it's also hard to not put all of that pressure on yourself to have to do that.
Yeah.
So the other wonderful gift of these tools is that it really gives the educator a reset for themselves. And sometimes in that moment, it's, you know what, why don't we all just stop for a moment, put our things down, close our eyes, you turn down the lights a little bit, you guide them in a meditation or even some gentle movement with breath, just to like change the energy of what just happened in the room. So, with my own my own kids when they were little, I said, we're going to have a redo.
I love that.
Take two, do over.
Nice.
Or do it. So, we all need that. We all do. I mean, to think that we need to bear all this pressure and hold it together all the time so tightly, we're bound to break, right? So we really need, for everyone within the classroom, teachers included, school counselors included, we need to fill ourselves up with the resources to take care of ourselves so that we could take care of our students.
That's wonderful. And as we wrap up, I always like to leave our audience with one big nugget of information that they could take away from our session. So what is the one thing that you really want our audience to take away from all of this and all of the yoga and mindfulness and everything that Zensational Kids does? What do you want them to take away with them today?
I think the biggest thing is that we all would love for change to happen in our schools right now. I don't think I've talked to any educator that would say, no, it is all perfect. And for so long, we have looked for outside legislators and, people writing all the curriculum and the things that we have to teach, for everybody out there external of our home of the school, to really say, like, lay the gauntlet down, like, this is the change that we're going to have now, and this is really going to make it all better, and we're going to take care of everybody a lot more. It's not going to happen from the outside in. It's not. It has to happen from the inside out. And the best way for that to happen is from within each individual. I truly believe that every educator came into this profession because they have a passion for changing lives, for touching lives. That's an inside job.
Yep.
right? So we need to go back to that, right? We need to like leave all the craziness out there and come back home to ourselves.
Yeah.
And we can do that in very, very simple ways. And when we embed it into our daily practices as a reminder of who we all are, ourselves as educators and our students, that's when our brilliance comes out.
Yeah.
It comes out from within, right? But we need to have those moments of reconnecting to ourselves.
I love that. That is all great. Thank you so much, Allison, for sharing all of this. I always walk away from sessions learning more information, and this is no exception. You have completely transformed the way that I think about school-age students and the whole school system in general, and it is way more than just yoga in a studio. You could practice it beyond the walls of anywhere. So I thank you for being here. I thank Zensational Kids for being a sponsor for today's episode. And I look forward to having you on again. I think we should really dive deep into the whole, the counselor and educator side of it, because I'm sure that there is so much more to learn from that end. So we will completely see Zensational Kids from all angles. And I cannot wait for that. This was extremely a pleasure to interview you. Thank you so much for being a guest. And to all of you out there, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Disrupt Health. I am Julie Palumbo, and I look forward to seeing you next week.